in China, but for the reasons that are exact opposite, i.e. Chinese capital moving abroad. This is sort of US circa 70s, 60s, 70s, Japan 80s, 90s, and now Chinese capital moving abroad, or multinational capital that was in China exiting to manufacture or to add value, whatever it may be, elsewhere. I think for me is that sort of Southeast Asian countries, think from Thailand, Myanmar, Vietnam stereotypically, maybe Sri Lanka to an extent amongst a few others, Indonesia, there are new competitors from a developing world perspective. So the advisory work is not just for companies, but the countries and saying, guys, how do countries compete here? How do we attract these key multinationals or Chinese multinationals, whoever it may be? We've seen this incredible establishment and fluidity of a supply chain, value chain throughout Asia over the last 20, 30 years that's come about. We haven't seen that in Latin America. We haven't seen that in Africa. We're seeing it now in Southeast Asia as well. So for me on this point is really how do we start to attract this capital, to think about manufacturing where, again, I say China's been incredibly disruptive. For me, it's how do we create the necessary ecosystems? And the minister from Ethiopia was talking earlier. I can confidently say Africa will not industrialize, but certain parts of Africa will industrialize. Again, this is a very big geography. And I'm very positive, those of you who haven't spent time in Ethiopia recently, I got there quite a bit, and the industrial zones are spectacular. It reminds me of China circa 1990, South China. Massive industrial zones, sort of urbanization, productivity rising, people doing stuff in the country, and the country's on that sort of long growth trajectory, if you will. I think, but the one thing the minister said earlier, which for me is very new, is something which doesn't quite resonate, I think, amongst us in Europe, but I know it does in Asia, in China, and gentlemen from Korea, my former home, is that this notion of cultural competitive clusters of Asian manufacturing, think China, think Korea, and the minister spoke about it, in these industrial parks in Ethiopia. It's taken Michael Porter's clustering concept one step further and looking at sort of the cultural aspect thereof, i.e. the cultural comfort that comes from a Chinese cluster, if you will, in a zone in Ethiopia. We saw this announced in 2006 by former President Hu Jintao, and now we're seeing these Korean zones move into our region. That's very interesting, and I think that's a sort of a softer side as to how these clusters start to emerge in other aspirational industrializing economies.
Okay, so then you are somehow saying that maybe from the perspective of a developing policy, maybe it is much more important to create, and maybe that's the job of the government whatsoever, to create clusters where then rounds and rounds of additionality could be brought in and become bigger. So creating clusters, is that the issue? And compared to, for decades, it was with regard to development policy, institution building. That was the credo. So is it a contradiction, or you need to do both?
I think it's, for me, it's just like China, is it saying that if you have to create special economic zones or industrial zones, isn't that an indicator that the actual macro-national system is failing? You have to carve out dedicated zones. I've tried in India with not terribly much success. In Ethiopia now it's working because rather than turn the whole ship around at a national level, you create these sort of these pockets of policy agility, if you will, and capital enablement. And I think that's increasingly, that's what I see in South Africa. We have that challenge as well, is the system may be working at a macro-national level. So how do we carve out key zones, placate political opposition in the process, internal, and allow for this industry to begin to thrive? I think that's the point I'm getting at here.
So a couple of things. So first of all, in India, if you look at, when Maruti Udyog was set up, a bunch of Japanese vendors went and set up shop right next to Maruti in Gurgaon. And I think, so that's like a huge automotive component cluster that came up. I don't think it was set up as a special economic zone, but, it worked. Similarly, in Chennai, when we partnered with Ford Motor Company and set up their, what was at that time a joint venture. There was a cluster of American vendors or, vendors to Ford Motor Company that went in and set up right next to them. And the same thing happened with Hyundai, also in Chennai. Now, as far as special economic zones are concerned, there may be different reasons why they worked or didn't work, but I think it takes some time and patience. So the first special economic zone that we set up near Chennai is doing fantastic. It's doing really well. And I think, the next one's also, it's not going to happen overnight. So you need to set it up and create the enabling environments. And, it may, if it's done right, I think it can work out quite well.
My opinion, if I can give my opinion about government policy, I think that very often government politics, it's my Italian mentality, but very often government policies make more disaster than benefit to countries. One example is Brazil, for example, where the tractor business is subsidized only to made in Brazil company. This has created a very inefficient industry, local, where the good years they sell, but the bad years they're not able to export because there is no efficiency. In my opinion, I know a little bit India and China. It was not special policy they adopted. They just opened their market to the foreigner investment. And this is, I think, is the number one policy that could help a government. Like Nigeria, of course, they cannot think to open a manufacturing of, pizzas, because it's not working manufacturing pizza in Nigeria. But I believe that every country, they have their own needs, and if countries are open to investment, if there are some infrastructure that can help the industry, this is the right way for, if I were a government, of people to try to develop the economies. And by the way, this question, I go very often to China, India. In my opinion, the real mistake that India made is in investing in infrastructure compared to China, because China is incredible. Rather, in India, they have invested just too few for foreign companies to go there.
So then, of course, one question is is somehow left is, and I'm curious about whether it is still important for manufacturers to be close to their target markets. Is that still an issue, or has it changed because of all these kind of technological advantages? Who's answering that?
I can answer. I think both.
Yeah.
I really do. When it comes to the customization, personalization, and I'll give you an example, you need to be local. So imagine if you're in a car accident and you blow out your knee, and you go into a hospital, they do an MRI scan, and they take that DICOM image, and they're able to make your exact knee on a 3D printer in the hospital. So that's when you need to be local. And not only could they do that, they could put a sensor, this is the future, they could put a sensor in your knee so you can actually the doctor can get the performance of the knee, how it's if there's adjustments that you need to make or whatever it might look like.
And he's sitting somewhere else.
He can sit somewhere else, he could be there local. But the machine is local, and it's all about personalized medicine. So that gives you an example of local. Then on the other hand, like I was talking about designers, they could be anywhere in the world, print anywhere in the world. So if there's a printer hooked up, through the internet, why couldn't they print? They're designed straight to a printer. So if somebody's in India and they want to print something in Ethiopia, then they can absolutely do that. You just got to think about logistics.
Yeah, interesting. I think we need to more or less to come to a question and answer session, but before doing so, of course, there is one question, especially from the German perspective left, since we are here in Düsseldorf. The Germans were, and allowed to say this since I'm not from Germany, so therefore Germans were always proud of this brand made in Germany. So that was quality rubber stamp per se. Is that still of any value in the future, or wouldn't we say it's not anymore made in Germany, it's made by Daimler-Benz, made by Siemens? How would you comment on that?
Two things. I would say yes, undoubtedly. Like it's made in Switzerland. You know, it's a quality product. But second thing is, so I'm an avid cyclist, and I only ride one bicycle. It's a Pinarello, which used to be made in Treviso in northern Italy, not far from Venice. All those bikes now are made in Taiwan. And who makes the best bicycles in the world? I kind of believe it's Taiwanese, all carbon fiber. But it's designed in Italy, I suspect. It has an Italian brand. It's a quality Italian bicycle. So, as mentioned earlier, the design and the manufacturing maybe are separated. But whatever you do in terms of offshoring and manufacturing, make sure you retain the value of the brand, the integrity of the brand, the history of that brand, and its origins. I think those two are separating now because of technology, because of globalization. Just a thought.
Of course, the made in Germany is a well-deserved name because, I mean, German are really good quality, robust design, etc. Sometimes it works well even when it's not really deserved. My main competitor is German, and I think that they can sell products a higher price because they're German, because we are comparable in terms of quality, technology, etc.